our first segment, the model of the color revolution had broken down. It had failed in Iran in the summer of 2009. It had been completely unsuccessful in Lebanon in 2005. And in addition, people saw what color revolutions brought. The IMF, NATO kleptocrats, Yushchenko, Timoshenko in Ukraine, an orgy of corruption, but above all, of immiseration, because that's what really counts. Corruption have you always with you, but immiseration, maybe not always, but in Ukraine certainly you did. And then the idea that the Roses Revolution of Georgia would lead to a fascist madman of the style of Saakashvili, who became increasingly oppressive. He's as repressive and as dependent on secret police and disappearances as anybody in the world. This had taken some of the luster off the CIA's model of the color revolution. But now they're looking to Assange and WikiLeaks. Now, Assange, the peroxide Pied Piper, the clearly psychologically impaired individual, many would say zombified, emotionally frozen or somehow impaired, coming out of the Ann Hamilton Byrne cult when many kids were eating milk and cookies after school. It looks like Assange may have been among those poor little victims who was getting LSD and powerful psychopharmaca, which can explain his characteristic mentality. We also know that, as I point out in one of my essays up on Tarpley.net, Cass Sunstein in 2008 wrote a paper calling for government to foment organizations that would carry out the cognitive disruption of opposition movements that embraced false conspiracy theories. In other words, who challenged the conspiracy theories purveyed by the regime. And we also know that in the beginning of 2007, in the first months of WikiLeaks' existence, it was Cass Sunstein in his infamous article, A Brave New WikiLeaks World, published in the Washington Post, February 2007. Take a look on my website. He celebrated the existence of WikiLeaks as an organization primarily devoted to the destabilization of China. That, of course, the original WikiLeaks board has been pointed out, was heavily larded with fishy Chinese dissidents, pro-democracy activists, generally from the orbit of the Soros group of foundations, in a sense, U.S. intelligence operatives. Assange recently has been interviewed to the effect that China is still the main enemy of WikiLeaks, that the Chinese cyber defenses are the thing that the WikiLeaks people are trying to crash through. So the idea then is, to the extent that WikiLeaks is able to build up any credibility at all, they would try to use it at some point to strike a blow against China and Russia, as we see they're already doing it, although it hasn't turned out that well for them. There's an element of chaos and bungling and friction, as von Clausewitz would say, in this entire thing. So the idea now is that across the world you have the post-9/11 generation. That is to say, people who have come into political awareness and psychological maturity in the post-9/11 world. And the estimate at Langley is that these people are estranged and alienated from their governments, but they also don't like the existing opposition parties, wherever that is. In particular, in the Arab world, they don't like the repressive, entrenched, conservative, sclerotic governments of these different countries that we've gone through, be it Mubarak, of course, the greatest example, Gaddafi, same thing. But at the same time, they also reject the Islamist opposition, which they feel is also oppressive and unacceptable. So here we have a pool of youth who are available for operations. They can be mobilized. They can be essentially duped and turned into a battering ram by the U.S. intelligence community in the same way that the left libs of the peace movement were essentially hijacked by the Obama campaign of 2007, 2008. And, of course, among fringes of this group, you have an outlook which is nourished by the existence of a purely Internet culture. It tends towards autistic frames of mind, and in particular in terms of philosophy. It ends up being a form of modern nihilism. Nihilism, not much talked about today. Nihilism generally being the word that you could apply to certain extreme, say, Russian anarchists in the 19th century, in the 1850s, 1860s, 1870s, the Narodnaya Volya and similar groups. Again, most of them caught up in the web of British intelligence, given the British-Russian conflict, which continues in many forms to this day. The nihilists around the world, that's the constituency that the CIA is looking for. Now, this doesn't mean that everybody who wants to overthrow Ben Ali is a nihilist. It means that the hardcore WikiLeaks Assange shock troops, and we'd have to go and look at RU Leaks, the Russian branch of WikiLeaks, and the different country branches. These may be different, but I think the common denominator is it's a rebellion which is basically anarchist, but it has no politics. What are you for? Assange is not in favor of ending the Iraq War. He doesn't make any such demand. He doesn't say U.S. troops get out of Afghanistan, U.S. troops get out of Iraq. He has no political demands. His demand is only transparency and presumably anti-corruption. Well, that's essentially what the CIA has been working with these many years. That's the obvious tool of a foreign intelligence agency under conditions of late imperialism to try to attack all kinds of regimes that they don't like. And generally, you've got to remember that even though the regime that they're attacking is not necessarily very attractive, the regime that they want to bring in is usually going to be worse. Remember, the why of all this. Why is the U.S. seeking to overthrow the various governments in the Arab world? Well, it's because, and we've seen this for the past 4 to 5 years, more or less soon after 9/11, the U.S. foreign policy became, and especially with the beginning of the Iraq War, this came in big time, let's create a block of states that would be Arab and would be primarily Sunni in terms of the dominant ruling class and government structures, and let's play them against Iran, the Shiites, and the various allies, right, the Hezbollahs and so forth, the allies of the Iranians in the Middle East. The Syrians, if that's possible, would get chewed up in the middle of this. So the idea then is get a block of states that would be Arab and Sunni at the same time, and use that to dominate the region. Maybe have a war, or maybe just have a protracted period of conflict. But you have the U.S. essentially be able to maintain a position by the fact that everybody else is split. Now, naturally, people like Mubarak, Gaddafi, Boumediene, they're not interested in this. What's in it for them? So the U.S. wants new puppets that would be much weaker, much more unstable, and much more likely to be playable in the sense that they would need glory, they'd be looking for fights, and that would lead to the U.S. wishes. Back in a minute.